A widowed truck driver pulls off the interstate in the middle of a Midwest downpour. Because a woman on the shoulder isn't waving, she's watching the road like it's hunting her. She has no phone, no ID, and she begs for one thing: hide me for one night. He should drive away. He has a son at home and a life already falling apart, but he opens the door anyway. 3 days later, a black SUV circles his house. The county starts asking questions, and her face explodes on national TV. What would you do if kindness put your child at risk and love asked you to stay? The rain had followed him since Des Moines, sticking to the windshield like it had a reason to stay. He drove the old Freightliner with one hand tight on the wheel and the other resting near a stack of envelopes on the passenger seat, stamped "Final Notice" in red. The radio murmured late-night farm reports he wasn't listening to. What he was hearing instead was the echo of the county office clerk from last week, polite voice, sharp meaning, reminding him that missed payments had a way of turning into custody reviews. When the lights of a small Casey's general store appeared off Interstate 80, he slowed more from habit than need. That was when he saw her. She stood past the exit ramp, rain soaking through her clothes, not waving, not signaling, just watching the road like it might come back for her. He passed her once, swore under his breath, then eased onto the shoulder anyway. When he stepped out, boots splashing, she spoke before he could. Her words came clipped, breathless. She had nothing on her, no phone, no wallet, no name she trusted. She didn't ask for help, she asked to disappear. One night, she said, no police, no hospital, no calls. He looked at her hands shaking and thought of his son asleep under a faded Cubs blanket. Trouble, he knew, always sounded reasonable at first. He told himself to leave. He even said it out loud, that he couldn't do this, that he had a kid at home and a life already leaning sideways. She nodded like she understood and stepped back from the truck. But fear slipped through her composure, quick and unguarded. It wasn't desperation meant to persuade, it was the kind that expected nothing. That was what stopped him. He asked her name, and she hesitated just long enough for him to know it was borrowed. When headlights appeared in the distance, she flinched hard, shoulders locking like she was bracing for impact. That settled it. He opened the passenger door and told her to get in, voice rough with irritation he aimed at himself. Inside the cab, the smell of wet fabric mixed with stale coffee. She kept her eyes on the floor mat, fingers clenched around the strap of a coat that was too thin for Iowa in March. As they drove, she thanked him once, quietly, then went silent again. He noticed how she counted the exits, how she turned her face away from reflective signs. He didn't ask questions. He focused on the road, telling himself this was temporary, telling himself he was still a good father, even as the night rearranged his priorities without permission. His house sat on a narrow street just off town, close enough that the grain elevator lights were visible from the porch. He parked beside his dented 2012 Ford Taurus, engine ticking as it cooled. Inside, the smell of reheated spaghetti lingered. Unpaid utility notices lay near the sink, held down by a magnet from the Iowa State Fair. His son appeared in the hallway, hair flattened on one side, blanket dragging behind him. He didn't cry or hide, just stared, studying the stranger with the seriousness of a child who had learned observation before trust. The woman knelt slowly, making herself smaller. She told him she would only be there one night, that his dad was helping her because sometimes people needed that. Her voice was steady but careful, like glass. The boy looked up at his father instead, waiting. He nodded once. That was enough. The woman smiled, not relief, but gratitude edged with guilt. In the kitchen, the father poured water into the kettle, hands shaking just enough to annoy him. He noticed how she stood near walls, how she avoided the front windows. When he pointed to the couch, she accepted like it was a gift she didn't deserve. The boy went back to bed without protest, and that small compliance weighed heavier than any accusation. They spoke little after that. He found an old blanket from the hall closet and a clean pillow that still smelled faintly of laundry soap. He set a chipped mug of tea on the coffee table, the same mug his wife used to claim on cold nights. She wrapped both hands around it as if warmth were permission to breathe. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through delivery logs he already knew by heart, listening for movement. Once she walked toward the front window and stopped short, backing away when a sedan passed, its headlights washing the room. He pretended not to see, but he saw everything. Near dawn, when exhaustion blurred his thoughts, something slipped from her coat pocket onto the rug. A scrap of paper, folded and worn. He picked it up without thinking. Just a phone number, handwritten, no name. He put it back where it fell, ashamed of the curiosity. When she woke, eyes red and unfocused, she whispered thanks again, like she was apologizing for existing. He told her she could stay until the rain eased, already knowing the storm outside had almost passed. He didn't say what both of them understood, that inside the house, something fragile and dangerous had already taken root. The morning light crept in pale and ordinary, the kind that made everything look manageable, even when it wasn't. He heard the weather report on the local AM station announce clearing skies, and the normalcy of it unsettled him more than the rain had. The woman sat on the edge of the couch, shoes lined neatly beside it, posture careful. When his son came in for breakfast, she moved aside instinctively, giving space, watching the interaction like it mattered more than her own comfort. The boy poured cereal and glanced at her, then at his father. She offered a small smile and looked away, letting him decide the terms. The father noticed that and felt something loosen in his chest. They ate mostly in silence. She asked where the bathroom was, thanked him again, folded the blanket before standing. There was no sense of relief in her movements, only caution layered over exhaustion. As she washed her hands at the sink, he saw faint bruises along her wrist, half hidden. He didn't comment. Some truths arrived only when invited. When she finished, she stood there waiting, like a guest whose welcome was expiring. He told her again she could stay a bit longer, that the roads were still slick. She nodded, accepting the excuse they both needed. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Inside, the night's choice settled into place, irreversible, quietly beginning to change all of them. By the third morning, the boy started setting out a second bowl without being asked. She didn't comment on it, and neither did his father. It became a quiet ritual, like the way she rinsed the mugs before anyone else woke up, or how she folded the dish towels the same way every time, into thirds, tucked just so. She never overstepped, not even once. She never asked for anything either, except on the second night when the boy had trouble sleeping and she gently offered to read him something. The father froze in the hallway, hand still on the light switch, unsure if he should intervene. But the boy nodded just once, and she picked a worn copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends from the shelf. Her voice wasn't theatrical. It was soft and even, like she knew better than to compete with silence. The next day, the boy stayed in the kitchen longer after breakfast, lingering near her while she made scrambled eggs with the last of the sharp cheddar from Hy-Vee. The father watched them from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure if what he was seeing was comfort or danger. His instinct screamed to protect. What scared him more was that he didn't know from who anymore. He tried to keep his guard up, but people betray themselves in the small things, like the way she always checked the front door twice after it was locked, or how she never turned her back to the window while folding laundry. She moved with the awareness of someone who had been watched before, who didn't trust silence unless she was controlling it. Yet when the boy spilled juice all over the table and burst into tears, she didn't flinch. She knelt, not to clean it, but to meet his eye level, and said, "It's just juice, and it's just a table. You didn't break anything that can't be fixed." The father swallowed hard at that, because it had taken him nearly 2 years to say something similar after his wife's accident. That night, after the boy fell asleep with a coloring book still open beside him, the woman walked into the laundry room, holding a frayed flannel sleeve and a look of reluctant defeat. "Do you have thread?" she asked, holding up the shirt. "It's the only one that fits, right?" He didn't answer. He just walked past her, opened the top drawer in the old cedar dresser, and brought out a dusty Singer sewing kit with a broken clasp. His wife's. When he handed it to her, their fingers touched. Neither pulled away. She sat on the dryer, shoulders curved inward, threading the needle slowly, like she didn't trust her hands anymore. He leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You sew much?" he asked, voice low. She shrugged, eyes on the thread. "Used to fix buttons, nothing serious." The silence between them thickened, not uncomfortable, just heavy with what hadn't been said. He wanted to ask her who she used to fix buttons for, a kid, a partner, herself. But instead, he nodded toward the radio perched on top of the dryer. "It still works, but only if you punch the side." She smiled faintly and gave it a smack. Nothing. She tried again. A crackle, then a voice from KHOI 89.1 FM, the Ames community station. Some old folk song faded in, and for a second her shoulders dropped. "That song was playing when I left," she said. "Not this version, but the words were the same." He didn't ask what she left. She didn't volunteer it, but she set the needle down for a moment and just sat there, not looking at him, not looking away either. Something about the silence shifted, softer now. But soft wasn't safe, not in a town like theirs. On Thursday morning, he caught sight of the neighbor, Mrs. Halverson, pausing her mail collection to glance too long at his porch. A day later, a friend from the co-op asked if everything was all right at home. "Saw someone new around," he said, in the voice of someone pretending not to pry. It spiraled quickly after that. The woman didn't know what was being said, but she felt the change in air. She stopped reading to the boy. She kept to the back of the house. She started packing small things into her coat pockets, nothing dramatic, just preparation. The father noticed. "You don't have to disappear," he told her. She didn't look up from where she was folding the boy's hoodie. "That's not true," she said, quiet and resigned. "People don't like what they can't explain." That evening, when a black Lincoln Navigator rolled slowly past the curb and lingered with its engine low, she went pale. "Do you know that car?" he asked, stepping closer to the window. She didn't answer, but her hand gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to leave indentations. He moved between her and the glass without thinking. "You're not running," he said, "not unless you want to." The words surprised even him. The boy asked the next morning if she was leaving. She didn't say yes, but she didn't lie either. "Sometimes, when people care, they let you go before it gets worse," she said. The boy looked at her, eyes narrowed with the quiet calculation only kids can do. "But it's not worse," he said. "It's better." She didn't cry, but she looked down fast, and her voice wavered when she replied, "That's the part that scares me." Later, the father found a slip of paper tucked beneath the boy's drawing pad. It was the same number he had seen fall from her coat the first night. But now it had a name written above it, first name only. No last name, no explanation, just one more thing that wasn't his to ask about. He stared at it for a long time before sliding it back between the pages. That night, she made grilled cheese with tomato soup and set 3 places out of habit. No one mentioned it. The boy told a story about his teacher getting stuck in traffic on US Route 30 and missing the entire first period. She laughed, not politely, not cautiously, real and full, like it slipped out before she could stop it. It was the first time they saw what her face looked like without tension. It undid something in the room. It also made the silence that followed sharper. By the end of the third night, the air in the house had changed. Not tense exactly, but suspended, like they were all waiting for someone to make a choice that no one wanted to own. She folded her blanket again and placed it neatly on the couch, smoothing the corners with deliberate care. The boy watched her, arms crossed, a stubborn frown on his face. "It's not raining anymore," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know. the father replied, standing near the doorway. She hesitated, hand on the back of the couch. "Thank you for this, for trusting me even when it didn't make sense." He didn't move, didn't speak at first. Then he said, "It still doesn't." She almost smiled at that, almost. "That's what makes it real." She didn't ask to stay again. He didn't ask her to go. The clock ticked into midnight, and somewhere in town a siren wailed in the distance, ignored by all three. She sat back down, not with confidence, but with something closer to peace. For now they stayed. For now 3 was still a number they all allowed. The knock wasn't loud. It was the kind that was meant to sound polite, but landed like a warning anyway. When the father opened the door, the woman standing on the porch was dressed in state-issued khakis and carried a clipboard, a badge that read County Family Services, and a neutral smile that felt too well practiced. She introduced herself as Ms. Delaney, voice sweetened with protocol. The father didn't invite her in. He stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind him, but not enough to hide the small figure watching through the gap. "Ms." Delaney asked questions that sounded harmless, but landed sharp. How long had the guest been there? What her full name was? If she had legal ID? If the child had shown any behavioral changes lately? The father kept his tone steady, but his chest felt tight, like something was collapsing inward. He'd spent months proving he could raise his son alone, showing up to meetings at the Greene County office with medical records, permission slips from Boone Elementary, and grocery receipts. And now, one anonymous call might undo it all. Inside, his son clung to his shirt hem, eyes wide and alert, tracking every word as if someone might point and say, "This one, we're taking this one." She didn't say anything when the caseworker left, but her mouth was drawn thin, her shoulders locked in that defensive tilt he'd seen before. That night, after the boy went to bed, she folded the same blanket she had used since the first night and placed it gently on the couch, smoothing the edges like she was putting away something sacred. She didn't take anything else. No food, no clothing, not even the phone charger she had borrowed from the junk drawer. In the kitchen, she pulled the old Bible off the shelf. It still had the father's name inscribed on the inside, a gift from his grandmother, the kind of thing that stays even after grief has unpacked itself. She slid a piece of paper between the pages, no envelope, no flourish, just a few lines written in pen, with a hand that had once learned to write press releases and contracts, but now shook. She didn't say goodbye. She opened the door softly, avoiding the creak near the hinge, and walked into the dark before the father could wake. By the time the boy came into the living room in the morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes, the couch was empty. "Where is she?" he asked, quiet. The father looked down at the folded blanket. "She had to go," he answered, and hated how much it sounded like a lie. The news hit 3 days later. Her face appeared on the muted TV in the back of the Rusty Spoon diner, between grain prices and a local report on flooding near Cedar Rapids. At first, the father didn't recognize her. She was wearing a blazer and makeup, hair pinned back, speaking at a press conference with a calm voice, giving nothing away. But her eyes were the same, clear, alert, carrying that quiet edge of survival. The headline scrolling across the screen read, "Claire Ryland reemerges after disappearance. CEO of Ryland Freight, linked to internal scandal." The father's stomach dropped. The woman who had rinsed his dishes and read to his son was not a drifter. She was the temporary head of one of the largest transport companies in the country, the same name stamped on half the trucks he passed on the interstate. Rumors took seconds to spread. At the co-op, people stopped talking when he entered. At Boone Elementary, the teacher asked if everything was okay at home. Too kindly. Miss Delaney came back with more direct questions. The father gave the same answers, but now they landed differently. He watched his son draw quieter, more watchful, like he sensed the house wasn't safe ground anymore. All the father could think about was that folded blanket still on the couch, untouched. When she returned, it was without warning. No car in the driveway, no footsteps on gravel. 1 minute he was pouring coffee into the dented travel mug with the faded John Deere logo, and the next she was standing in the doorway, face pale, eyes heavy with something he hadn't seen before. Resolve. She wasn't dressed for running. She wore jeans and a soft grey coat that looked almost civilian, and she carried nothing but a small leather folder under her arm. "I'm not here to fix it with money," she said before he could speak, "and I didn't come for forgiveness." He stared at her for a long time. "Then why?" he asked. She set the folder on the table. Inside were copies of signed statements, names of board members, and a transcript of the testimony she had given to a federal investigator 2 days prior. She looked him in the eye. "Because you gave me a place to be human again, and they tried to turn that into something ugly." Her voice cracked just once. "I won't let them rewrite what happened here. I'll tell the truth. All of it." He said nothing, jaw tight, arms crossed. She stood quietly, letting the silence stretch. The boy's footsteps were soft on the floorboards. He stopped at the edge of the hallway, half hiding behind the frame. She saw him and smiled, a small, broken thing. The boy was the one who broke the silence. He stepped into the room and stood between them, looking from one face to the other like trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you staying?" he asked, not like a child begging, but like someone trying to understand the terms. She knelt slowly, careful not to get too close. "Only if I can do it right this time," she said. "I'm not running again. Not from anyone." She reached into her coat and took out a small chain. His keychain, the one he had given her after she fixed his broken zipper in secret. A plastic blue tag from a Des Moines truck stop with the number 27 worn almost flat. "I kept this," she said. "It reminded me there were still places that didn't hurt." The boy looked down at it, then back at her, and nodded once. "Okay." She looked at the father, still unreadable. He exhaled slowly and sat at the table. "If you stay," he said, voice rough, "you stay as family. No handouts, no guilt. You walk beside us, not ahead." She blinked fast and nodded. "That's the only way I want to stay." She didn't move until he gestured toward the chair across from him. Then she sat, carefully, like sitting meant something sacred again. No one spoke for a while. The clock ticked above the microwave, blinking the wrong time since the last outage. The father reached into the Bible she had touched and pulled out the note. He read it again, even though he already knew it by heart. It didn't explain who she was, only who she had been there. Someone who made grilled cheese and remembered small birthdays, who fixed things without being asked, who left without slamming the door. Now, with the boy's small hand resting lightly on hers and the father watching both of them like a man who wasn't sure where the story ended, she said what none of them had yet. "This isn't about what I owe," she whispered. "It's about what I want to build." He nodded, slow. "Then we build." And just like that, no grand declarations, no cinematic music, only 3 people in a kitchen with old chairs and chipped mugs, and one promise that mattered, that they would all stay. Not perfect, not easy, but present. And in that moment, that was more than enough. What did you think about his choice to pull over that night, even knowing his son could pay the price? And do you believe she did the right thing by disappearing to protect them, or was it a betrayal? Tell us in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? If you want the next chapters and more emotional stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode.